Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So in this video I'd like to give you a tour of my front garden here. So it's currently early summer, it's July the 6th, and I'd like to give you a tour of how the front garden is doing. So this front garden is a bit different to my back garden. The back garden I keep as a tropical jungle style garden. The front garden here is much more traditional, although I don't ever do anything very traditional. I do a lot of unusual things, so there's also a lot of unusual plants mixed in as well. And the style of gardening I go for tends to be, as I say, bedding plants here and roses, so more formal. But if I see some weeds that have nice flowers, I just let them grow and I let them take over a little bit, basically. So some areas look a bit messier than others. So I'll take you around to the main beds at the front here. So the entrance to the garden, we've got these two hedges which came with the house, and I've just been keeping them maintained. They had really bad variegation reversion, so basically these are variegated privet hedges, and they were basically going green, and there was lots of green patches. You can see there's one or two bits that have still got green leaves, and I just need to keep them maintained. I had to cut out all the green growth, otherwise the whole hedge would go green. It wouldn't have this nice variegated yellow. So coming in, we've got my two laburnum trees. These were in full bloom just a few weeks ago, and these look really nice and they're doing quite well for me. What I'm planning to do is, you can see I've done put a bit of a frame up there to hold a new graft. My plan is to graft the two together and then do some kind of unusual archway using that graft. So it's just the early stages of this, and I'll document it later if it's successful, but I think it will take a few years to achieve what I'm trying. So going forward, this is the main pathway. On the left is a patch of lawn which was the original part of the garden. I'll show you some pictures now of what it was like originally. It was just a lawn with stepping stones and a few large shrubs. The large shrubs I've transplanted into my parents' garden, and I put in a new path and some new rose beds. So the lawn on the left is what's left of the original lawn, and the hedge was original as well. And so I don't know what I'm going to do with that section yet, but that's going to be something in the future. Hopefully I'll make something in there. At the moment it's just kept as a rough lawn. Sometimes I let it flower in spring because it has loads of dandelions and they're good for nature, for the pollinators, but also they look quite nice when they're all in flower. So I just kind of let it flower in spring and then cut it for the rest of the year. So the main beds here, as I say, are the rose beds. So I'll start off showing you the rose plants, but I won't show you them in too much detail as I've shown in previous videos in much more detail. And then I'll just show you the differences this year and how it differs to most years. So I've got 6 roses in total in my rose beds and 4 different varieties. So on the left here we have Fragrant Cloud. This is a really nice fragrant red rose. Now all my roses are very fragrant. Basically what I've gone for is roses that are really good against disease and also really fragrant. So that's on the left there. Coming over to the right now, I've also got another rose here which is York Gold. This has got lovely yellow flowers, also very fragrant. Coming along, I've got one of my favourite roses, which is Deep Secret. There's one here and there's one on the left mirroring it. Now unfortunately they're not in flower right now. You can see they've just finished flowering, but they're just about to flower again. I've got loads of flower buds coming on them. This is one of my favourite roses, really dark buds that are basically black when they come up, and then it goes to a dark red and slowly fades to a light red. In fact, I did deadhead it this morning. You can see some of the petals, that's about as light as it gets. Starts off almost black and then just gets lighter and goes to that kind of colour. And then we've also got Arthur Bell Rose, which is maybe my favourite. It's between this one and Deep Secret. The Arthur Bell Rose is nice. The buds start off red, as you can see here, and then they go to a bit of a dark yellow and then a lighter yellow and then a white eventually. What I like about this is it's extremely disease resistant and it has beautiful glossy leaves as well. So I've got 2 of them. This one unfortunately has been really badly attacked by sawfly. So you can see here the damage on the leaves by the sawfly. They're basically little caterpillars that attack the leaves and cause a lot of damage, so that's a shame. But you can see how shiny the leaves are, really lovely glossy leaves. So I really like them, and I'll show you some photos as well because they're not in flower unfortunately. So that's a quick tour of the roses that I've put in here. The other plants that are quite large and take up a lot of the bed are the dahlias. It's all the same variety I've got here. It's Café Au Late. So there's one in flower actually, which is very unusual because normally this doesn't flower for me until quite late in the year. I normally get flowers in late August, beginning of September, but this year it's just come out really early. Actually it started flowering at the very end of June, so I'm really happy with that. I think because I grew the tubers on a little bit this year inside the conservatory, and that really brought them on. So this is doing really well. The colour varies quite a bit for me. When I first bought them they were all more of this kind of creamy yellow colour, but they've now all started to go a bit more of a pink colour. And the Café Au Late variety, it produces giant heads. The heads can be 2 or 3 times the size of this one. This is by no means as large as they can get. And they do vary a bit in colour, so some years they're a bit more pink, other years they're a bit more kind of a cream colour. So I've got lots of these dotted around. You can see I've got 3 on the right and there's also 3 on the left. The ones on the left, I've got a huge clump here. This is the main clump basically that I've taken divisions off of, and you can see that's an absolute monster. So that's going to get really big by the time it's flowering, and they do normally get to about 1.5 meters by the end of summer. So the rest of the beds, what I normally do is I put in summer bedding in late May, but this year it's been really cold and really damp, so we actually had a record-breaking warm May, and it was the warmest on record. But then ever since then, the whole of June and the beginning of July has been really quite cool and damp and wet, and even though May was record-breakingly warm, it was quite wet as well. So in previous years my pansies and violas have died off from the dry weather and succumbed to aphids as well. This year, because it's been damp and quite cool for most of the summer so far, they've done really well. And they also self-seeded quite well last winter, so what I've done is I've just moved the self-seeded plants into rows along the side, and there's a few coming up as well here and there which I've just kind of left, and I'll just kind of reposition them as they self-seed. So I'm really happy with how they look. Originally it was all this kind of white and purple one you can see down here. I'm always a big fan of the purple flowers, especially with violas and pansies. So this is the original one I went for, but what's happened is it's self-seeded, and some of the seeds you can see are different shades of purple, and we've also got some yellow ones and just lots of different ones coming up because they're all self-seeded. So it's really nice to see them coming up, and that's really given me a lot of colour. Now I don't know how long they'll last. They don't like hot weather or dry weather, so if we continue with this cool damp weather for the rest of summer, it will look really nice with the violas, and the other plants will maybe suffer a bit. But if we have hotter, drier weather, the dahlias will do really well, but the violas and the pansies will start to die off. So we'll just see how the weather goes for the rest of the summer, but at the moment I'm really enjoying the display I've got of these pansies. So that's the main plants. I've also added a couple of fuchsias, but there's not really much to show with them. They're very young. You can see there's one in the bed down here. They're giant flowered fuchsias, and they're not hardy, so I need to take them in winter, but I'll probably give you an update on them at the end of summer. So going forward, we've got the two beds here, and then we've got a semicircular bed there, and then on the alongside the thin bit by the driveway there's also the bulb bed, which I'll show you later. So at the end here I always put some interesting plants. Previous years on the right over here I've had some giant banana trees, I've had some Ensete ventricosum growing here, and they got huge and absolutely loved it. This year I wasn't able to take them in time, and they got quite badly damaged by the frost, and then I wasn't able to keep them warm enough either throughout the winter, so they've died off unfortunately. So what I've got instead is I've got some interesting grafted dahlias. So on the top here is the Cafe late dahlia, and then the root system is a tree dahlia, which is a really big dahlia called Dahlia imperialis, and it can grow about 5 meters in height, but it doesn't really flower for me because it needs a longer growing season. So it's very vigorous root system. If I pan down, you should be able to hopefully see the graft is just in there. So the graft was done last spring. Last summer it grew, it didn't get very big, but this summer it's really starting to take off. So I've actually overwintered this, and it's been doing quite well. You can see it's really starting to shoot up now, so hopefully we'll get some flowers by the end of summer. I'm hoping some of the size and vigor of the tree dahlia will transfer onto the large flowering of Cafe late dahlia. We'll maybe get some extra big flowers or just some stronger growth. We do on the left have another one over here. So you can see the big strong stem down there is the tree dahlia, and then grafted on the top this year I've got the Cafe late on 2 of the branches. So this was much taller. I had to cut it down to fit it in my conservatory and overwinter it. It was probably about another meter or so in height. It was probably about 3 meters last summer. So I've just got these 2 new shoots coming up, and they're the Cafe late grafted on top. I don't know if they'll flower this summer, don't know if there's enough time in the season, but we'll see. Hopefully they'll flower. It'll be really interesting if they do, because then I'll have a 2 meter tall dahlia with massive flowers on the top, and I'm hoping to overwinter this again for another winter, because then the grass will be mature and this should do much better, and next summer I should get the flowers much earlier. So I've also, as I say, got these semicircular beds. So these are mostly planted up with tree lilies. So these are just very tall lilies. They can grow up to about 2 meters in height. You can see the one at the back there is already around the 2 meter mark. These look amazing in midsummer. Unfortunately none of them are in flower to show you yet, but you can see they're all looking quite healthy. The only sign of damage I have on some of the plants is hail damage. So as I was saying, it's been surprisingly cold this year, and we had some really bad hailstorms, and you can see lots of little pock marks on the leaves there from the hail damage. So that's the same on some of my other plants. The hail was quite damaging, unfortunately. So coming over here, I've got one of my sunflowers in the corner. I've also got my bird of paradise plant. So this flowered really well for me in spring. It's finished flowering now, and I've decided to put it outside, see how it does over summer. I've been surprised at how well it takes my winters. I've had it inside in the conservatory, so it never gets frost, but my conservatory is too cold for most of my tropical plants, and most of my plants really suffer as it gets close to freezing in winter. But this goes through winter without any damage, even at temperatures very close to freezing. So the cold doesn't seem to bother it too much, although the frost would definitely damage it. So I thought I'll put it outside, even though my summers are quite cool. This is my warmest, most sheltered part of the garden. It gets full sunshine for most of the day until around about 3 or 4 o'clock. So hopefully it will flower well for me again and size up a bit with the extra sunlight. And next to that, I've got one of my 2 whiskey barrels. So I'm in a whiskey part of the world near the Spey Valley in North Scotland and Moray. And we have loads and loads of whiskey distilleries around. Basically every town has 1 or 2 whiskey distilleries. And because of that, there's thousands of barrels being disposed of every year, so you can get them really cheap. So it's cheaper for me to buy giant pots in the form of a whiskey barrel than it is to buy a plastic pot. So that's why I've got this nice whiskey barrel here. And this year I've planted a banana tree. So this here is actually an edible banana. I bought it last summer as a reasonable sized plant. It was probably about 1 meter in height, and I just kept it in my conservatory last summer because this is an edible banana. It's a Musa acuminata, so I don't expect it to do well in my climate. The other bananas I grow in the back garden are from high altitude areas, and they're hardy, so they can take a bit of frost. This one can't take any frost, and it's not from a high altitude area, so it likes hot summer weather. So I didn't think it would do well for me, but it's actually done really well so far. Now it has slowed down a bit because June's been so cold, but it did do really well in May when we had that warm weather. I'm hoping we'll get some hot weather again and it'll continue to take off. If we do get some hot weather this summer, I definitely expect it to go right up to the gutters, maybe slightly higher. It is quite a large tree. It's not the largest of the Musa acuminata varieties, but it's certainly not one of the smaller dwarf ones, so it will get to a decent size. And it's already sending up lots of pups from down below. You can see down here we got some nice pups coming up. What I like about the pups is we got these lovely like red stripes on the leaves, really nice looking leaves on them. And underneath these planters I've just planted it up with strawberries, so I could get a crop of strawberries this early summer. So coming across, we've also got one of my sunflowers. The problem with my sunflowers this year is last year I had a similar variety and it grew up the side of the house here and it was absolutely huge, went right up to the gutter. This year, with the very warm weather in May and then the cold weather in June with temperatures near freezing and hailstorms, it stressed all my sunflowers, and so my sunflowers have decided to flower far too early. So the longer it takes for a sunflower to flower, the larger it will get. Basically when it starts to flower, it doesn't really grow much taller. So unfortunately with them flowering so early this year, they're not going to get to their full size. You can see this one's quite small. Last year was an absolute giant because it didn't start flowering to the end of summer. So that's a real shame, and it looks like it's happened to nearly all my sunflowers this year, which is a bit of a disappointment. So coming over to the side here, we've got another whiskey barrel with more strawberries, and then this is one of my Anseti ventricosum morellii, which has got that lovely colour in the leaves. This comes from highland areas of Ethiopia, and so it doesn't mind cool weather, so this will do well in my summer even if we don't have a hot summer. But I do have to take it in winter time because it can't handle the frost. So coming over here, I've got my cycad down here. I thought I'd try it outside this year, see if it makes a difference. It only grows for me every 3 years, so it's a very slow growing plant. Basically it sits there with the leaves doing nothing for 3 years, and then the old leaves die off and then new leaves come up. So hopefully this might speed it up into some more growth. But it's about 25 years old now, and it just really hasn't got much bigger in those 25 years. So hopefully putting it outside on a really warm sunny position will hopefully help. And now behind that I've got my Cardiocrinum gigantium, which is my giant lily. It's around 2 meters 60 this year. I very recently made a video about this, so you can look at that into more detail if you want to see about this lily, but it's really spectacular. It's normally in my back garden because it doesn't like lots of hot sunshine, and this is a really sunny position, but I really wanted to appreciate it and I wanted to enjoy the amazing fragrance, so I put it here in my front garden just whilst it's flowering, and then I'll take it around to the back garden when it's finished. So on the other side of my semicircular bed, I've also got some more tree lilies. You can see these ones here. These are really quite large, and these are going to look absolutely spectacular when they're in flower in a few weeks time. And then underneath them I've also got some gladioli. These always look nice at the end of summer. Now gladioli, I don't normally think of them as hardy, but these came free with all my lily plants because I ordered over a certain amount of lilies on the order, and these have come up every year since I planted them, and normally I wouldn't expect them to be hardy, so I'm quite happy with them. They just kind of keep coming back every year. Only place I've lost some is the few died off in this area, not sure why, but otherwise the gladioli are right around the edge and they give me lovely flowers throughout the end of summer. So coming along, there's a few other things just dotted around. I've got some opium poppies that self-seed every now and again, and they have some really nice flowers, so I just let them grow up. If they're in a space that's not got much else in it, I just let them grow up. I also have some kale plants which are left over from spring. What I like to do in autumn is I like to plant up lots of kale plants because it gives a bit of colour in the middle of winter when nothing else is green, and then in summer you get all these lovely yellow flowers, so I like to have them in the garden. And we've also got some other plants that have just kind of self-seeded. So this here is purple toadflax. It's a weed that does self-seed everywhere quite easily, but I really like the purple flowers, so I just let it self-seed as it's just an interesting looking plant. So the corner of my house here is where I normally grow my giant sunflowers. This year it's actually bigger than it is normally at this time of year, but as I say, it's starting to flower already, so unfortunately it's not going to get as tall as it has in previous years, even though it's doing quite well for this time of year. So that's a bit of a shame that the flower head is already starting to form on it. I can show you down here. Normally by now this wouldn't have any flowers starting to form, but you can see there's already a flower starting to form. So it'll grow another foot or two and that'll be the maximum, so not as big as previous years. I've also got my Sonnetti down here. This is probably about 3 years old now, this one. Been doing well for me. I just keep it mostly frost free over winter. It can handle maybe -2, -3, but anything harder than that and it will kill it. So I just let it have a little bit of frost and then take it into the conservatory if we have any hard frosts. And it comes back every year just with cutting back and deadheading. And then I've got my Brugmansia. This is the plant that I had in my tropical bed last year, but with very high nitrogen levels in my tropical bed, it just grew loads of giant leaves and large weak stems that kept getting broken by the wind. So it never really got particularly large, because every time it did get big it would get snapped off by any winds, and didn't really flower much. So this year I put it in a pot to restrict its feed, and it's responded by putting out a lot more flowers and a lot less growth. So it's doing quite well this year. The first flower looks like it will open up maybe tonight. They tend to open at night time, and they have an amazing fragrance when they flower as well. So that's looking quite good. It was looking a lot healthier at the end of May when we had that warm weather, but then throughout June it's been quite cold. So you can see we got some like nutritional deficiency starting to show now from the cold stress. So hopefully we'll get some warm weather in July and August, and that will perk up a bit and start to look a bit healthier. And we've also got some begonias as well, tuberous begonias. Not much to see with them because they're still a bit young. Looking around here, I've got a rose that came with the garden. So this rose, I don't actually know the variety, but it's quite nice. Comes up every year, absolutely covered in flowers. No fragrance though, unfortunately. I always like to try and get a rose that is fragrant if I can, but this one is still quite a nice rose. It's quite interesting actually, because it starts off with these red buds, and then it goes to yellow petals, and then it kind of goes red fringes on the petals, and the whole thing kind of goes more red as it ages. So that's an interesting one. It kind of changes colour as it ages, which makes it a bit more interesting. And then looking over here, we've got my bulb border. I made a video about the bulb border previously. Basically the idea is I've got bulbs flowering in here pretty much year round, just different varieties that flower at different times. And the way that they grow is they don't really compete with each other, because their leaves also come up at different times. So what's happening at the moment, or in this month, is the alliums are just starting to finish. These are giant alliums and they're just starting to go over now, so probably a few more days and then they'll be losing their colour. You can see they're already starting to lose their colour a bit. They did look a lot nicer just a few days ago. And these are always absolutely covered in bees. The bees absolutely love the alliums, so it's good to see that it's good for the pollinators. But these have their leaves in the springtime and then they flower early summer. You can see if I look down here, they're pretty much completely lost all their leaves. They have a few dead yellow leaves, that's the allium leaves. They have really big interesting leaves, so there's a nice to have a bit of feature in spring. Just as they start to flower, they start to lose their leaves. That gives space for my other bulb, which is this one here, which is Nerine Bowdenii. This will be lots of leaves for now until autumn. The leaves will die, and as the leaves die off, then I'll get the nice pink flowers, and they're really, really vibrant flowers. And they're also very late in the year, September, October time. A lot of things are starting to die. This one comes up and gives a nice display, so it's nice to have something right at the end of the year. Then when these start to finish their flowering, then I get my autumn crocuses. There's nothing to show here at the moment because unfortunately the autumn crocuses are completely dormant at this time of year. But when everything else is dead in the winter time, the autumn crocuses come up. They have their leaves over winter and they also flower quite late. So they flower in November, December time. They haven't flowered well for me. I think my winters are a little bit cold for them and a bit too dark as well. But it's nice to have those flowers at the end of winter when not much else is in flower. And you can see just next to them, I've got some of these opium poppies again with the nice flowers. So these opium poppies, I originally used them to clear out the bed of weeds. This was a very weedy patch originally, and I just sowed it with loads of opium poppies to smother everything. and they did their job, smothered everything off, and then let me plant the bulbs without having too many weeds. Now I do occasionally self-seed, but they're annuals, so they're easy to take out, and that's why I use them. And the only other plant that was also here in the garden originally is this rose over here. It's not the best place because you have to be careful when you get out of the car not to be attacked by the thorns, but it's quite a nice one. Again, no fragrance unfortunately, but it's a very nice looking rose. I quite like how it's got a slightly yellow centre to it, and this kind of fades to white, and then it's fringed by pink. So it's a really nice looking rose, just the same as I say, it doesn't have any fragrance to it. So that's all for this video tour of my front garden. Hope you guys found it interesting. At this time of year, it's certainly the pansies that are looking their best. I'll be doing another video tour hopefully at the end of summer. It will probably be mainly the dahlias that will be in flower then, and the banana trees will be extra large. I also have a few more Enseti ventricosum lilies down here. They'll hopefully be quite a bit bigger by then as well. And the roses are normally also looking quite good by the end of summer. So that's all for this video. I hope you guys found it interesting, and I'll see you guys hopefully at the end of summer with the other flowers.